So now over to you, Saurabh, and thank you for presenting today.
Thank you so much, Angelina. I hope I am visible and audible.
You are.
All right, excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Saurabh Shah, and as Angelina said, I head Landbell GreenForest Solutions in India, and I'm quite excited today to talk about the successes and pitfalls of EPR systems in India. And I say systems because I'm not just talking about EPR system for plastic packaging, but I'm also going to touch upon the EPR system for or as we call it here, e-waste and batteries. A, li- um, a little bit about ourselves, as the name suggests, we are a joint venture between Landbell Group, which is quite popular, surely known to a lot of people here, and also Green Forest Solutions. We are a small but fast growing team here in India, consisting of directors Christoph and Sebastian, who are veterans of plastic recycling and e-waste and batteries EPR across the globe. We offer solutions for EPR for plastic waste, e-waste, and batteries. We also do packaging analysis of recyclability of packaging. We offer advisory services to multilateral organizations and private organizations on different streams of waste management. And we also do customized take-back solutions for various end-of-life materials. I want to talk about the timeline of EPR in India, how EPR has evolved. It's quite interesting that in a lot of different global forums, uh, there is a lot of interest on how EPR is working in India because people are aware that in a short time, legislatively, India has done quite well. So this is how the timeline of EPR in India has evolved. If we jog back to about 12 years ago, around 2010, 2012, there were a bunch of international or global companies operating in India. Almost every global company is operating in India, was doing some amount of voluntary EPR, basically as a part of their global obligations, right? 2016 was a defining year in which a lot of waste regulations were revised in India, and some of them actually got revised after a span of almost 15 years. So, from a legislation point of view, I think 2016 is a very important year when plastic waste rules were introduced, e-waste rules were introduced, municipal waste rules were also new municipal waste rules were also introduced. For the first time ever, the term extended producer responsibility found its way into the government rules of EPR. So that's when EPR was first spoken about. In 2018, as a result of introduction of these rules, the government empaneled about 15 PROs for implementation of EPR for plastic waste. So they said that if you are a producer and you need to comply with your EPR obligations, here is the list of 15 empaneled PROs and you shall work with them. And they did something similar for e-waste as well. They asked the recyclers basically to start their own PROs. So that's how it came out. In 2019, the government then withdrew the empanelment of PROs. They said that, you know what, we'll move away from the entire PRO system. We will only have two sets of obligated entities. One is the producers, and the second is the waste processors or recyclers. In 2020, which was also the COVID year, while everybody was locked down, the government actually went on an overdrive in terms of trying to register more and more producers or entities that should comply with EPR. They got them registered. It was all paper registration about 4 years ago. In my opinion, 2021 was a defining year for EPR in India, is when revised or amended EPR rules for e-waste, for plastic waste, both were introduced. The revised rules for plastic waste had a detailed guideline on how to comply for EPR, what is EPR, who are the obligated entities, what are your obligations, targets, so on and so forth. In 2022, they introduced what is now the portal for EPR obligation or EPR compliance in India. So plastic waste EPR rules got its own portal. And all of this, the custodian of all of this is the single regulator in India, which is also known as the Central Pollution Control Board. So the portal for EPR for plastic waste was introduced, and battery waste rules were also introduced. Interestingly, The previous version of the battery waste rules had about 4 to 5 categories. This one had 127 categories. So a huge shift and a huge development in EPR for e-waste. In 2023, while the three waste rules or EPR for the three waste rules were already defined, there was already a talk within the government that they want to introduce as many as 11 materials streams under EPR. So we saw EPR for waste tires, used oil, and also an portal introduction of a portal for compliance for EPR for e-waste. And now in 2024, there's no stopping. There is ELVs, non-ferrous metals. There is also other material streams which are being introduced, and there are some are in the draft stage, some are still in the pipeline. So you see, over the last 12 years, we've come a long way. Especially over the last 8 years, we've come a long way, and it's something that we take pride in. That there's a lot of work that the government has done in terms of legislation, but because there is a lot of work done in legislation, implementation becomes that much more challenging. You can imagine a country of 1.4 billion people. It's not easy. So I'm going to talk about it as we move along. So this is the value chain of plastics in EPR, and this is not something new. This is something that we see in each and every country in the world, right? That there is virgin material, there's production, manufacturing, consumption, and waste. What I want to highlight in this slide is not the value chain of plastic, but these are the various instruments. What you see here are the various instruments that different EPR systems, as we know across the world, have tried to incorporate within their legislation. What India has done is the three green boxes or the circles here, that they have incorporated three different elements in a single EPR rule, making it quite comprehensive in my opinion. They have, of course, the ground rule of EPR for, let's say, for plastic packaging in India is that you shall achieve a certain level of EPR credits for recycling and certain credits for end of life treatment. Of course, recycling is more preferred, and as we move along the years, they're going to try and bring 100% recycling and 0% end of life treatment. What is more important, and I think it's very crucial here, is that they have also introduced in the same EPR legislation a mandate for use of recycled content in packaging. Now, this is also something that gradually the targets increase. But if you read the EPR obligation, EPR rules for plastic packaging, you will see that already the government of India has introduced very aggressive and very ambitious targets to the producers for use of recycled content. And I want you to hold that thought, because also this is a big challenge that the producers and the recyclers are facing and are going to face in the near future. So these are the three main elements which I believe encompass what significantly a large universe of what is required in a plastic value chain. You see some of the other instruments here. For example, single-use plastic ban. Single-use plastic ban, like most countries and especially most developing countries, it is an easy thing for the government to say that now single-use plastic is being banned. So over the last 15 odd years, you will see that multiple times various states, various cities in the country have tried to put single-use plastic ban. But I would think that they have had 50-50 kind of a success. You will see that there's some of the usual suspects in single-use plastics are, let's say, plastic cutlery, balloons, etc., which are quite easily seen in developing countries like India. You will see a lot less of those out in the market, but you will still see a lot of single-use plastic bags used for groceries, used for vegetables, used for garbage, and various other applications quite easily available in the market. And one more thing here is the standards for recycled plastics. It's not a part of the EPR obligation, but it is a supplementary rule which the another authority, which is the Food Safety Authority, has introduced, because there is a mandate for use of recycled content. You cannot have a mandate for recycled content unless you have standards for recycled plastics. So that has come up as a result. Take back and DRS. I don't think the government of India is a huge fan of DRS. There are certain states like Goa and some other states which are talking about DRS within their states, but I think it's a little challenging to implement if it is not done on a countrywide level. And take back is also something that the producers are putting systems in place for take back, because they realize that if we have to use recycled content, which is a mandate under EPR, we need to bring back good quality material, for which they will need to put in place take back systems. So this is what the portals for EPR, if you just go and Google EPR, India EPR, plastic waste, you'll probably come across this portal, e-waste and batteries likewise. The success of EPR really is that a country which has predominantly informal sector in its entire waste value chain, the EPR system has been able to mainstream a huge number of these stakeholders. For example, as we speak in India, there are more than 43,000 registered producers and more than 3,000 registered plastic waste processors, which include recyclers, plastic to oil companies, companies doing or organizations doing plastic to road, etc. For e-waste, there are more than 7,000 registered producers. We do not, the government does not publish the number of recyclers, but I think if you look at various different sources, it's close more than 500 recyclers already registered. Also for batteries, there are more than 3,000 producers, close to 200 recyclers already registered. There is also a talk of refurbishers in the in the batteries regulation, where the government is encouraging refurbishing of end of life electronics and batteries, but the implementation for which has not yet begun. So I'm going to touch upon next is how is EPR categorization done and recover in terms of categories, recovery and credits for plastic waste, e-waste, and batteries. For plastic waste, there are four broad categories. One is the rigid plastics like your PET bottles, your HDP, shampoo bottles, oil bottles, etc. For flexible monolayer plastic is category 2. Multi-layer plastics are category 3, which are basically two or more layers which use another layer which is not a plastic, like your Tetra Pak would be a multi-layer plastic. And category 4, which has been recently introduced, is compostable plastics. The recovery and the credits are based on the recovery of either recycled granules or products. Like, for example, if you're making furniture out of plastic, or you're making bins or pots or benches out of multi-layer plastics, it is still eligible for you, for that particular recycler, to generate a credit. And the credits are generated in tons, as it is in most other countries. The additional features of EPR for plastic waste are minimum percentage of recycling, as I have been talking about a few minutes ago, that there is a mandate for minimum percentage of your, if a producer has, let's say, 4,000 tons of obligation for category 2, then as the rule suggests right now, at least 75% should be recycling, the balance can be end of life. And as I said a few minutes ago, there is a mandate for use of recycled content, which really kicks in from the year 2026. So if you talk to recyclers, if you talk to producers in India, everybody is gearing themselves up for use of recycled plastics. Challenges there, I will talk about it. E-waste, from a few categories to 127 categories of e-waste. I think the categories have been very well defined. I give you two examples of categories of e-waste under the e-waste EPR rule. ITEW, so these are just nomenclatures that I use. ITEW2 is personal computing equipment like your computers, your desktops, laptops, tablets, etc. MDW5, on the other hand, is, as a name, you can just guess that it is medical equipment, so nuclear medicine equipment and accessories. Just like that, all IT equipment, all household consumer durables, all power equipment, all the medical equipment, they all have their categories from 1 to 127. The recovery and credits. Now, this is something very interesting. I'm not sure if any other country, if there is, please tell me in the chat. I'd be happy to know. The government is really only interested in the recovery of these metals, that is the precious metal of gold, non-ferrous of copper and aluminum, ferrous of iron. So if I, as a recycler, am able to produce and show credits of these metals, I am able to transfer it to the producers. Now, for each and every equipment that is listed here in the 127 categories, the government has already defined through various consultations what should be the ideal recovery of metals, of each of these metals from each of these equipment. For example, if I have a refrigerator, then the 1 ton of refrigerator should give me, maybe, I'm just putting numbers there, don't quote me here, let's say 300 kilos of iron and 6 kilos of aluminum and 700 grams of copper. And because it's a refrigerator, there is no gold. If you have a laptop instead, you have gold. So from that point of view, each recycler is supposed to recover these metals and then put the credits of these metals on the portal, which then get transferred to the producers. And the additional feature, as I was saying, that there is encouragement for refurbishing. Also, very smart rule here that if you show refurbishing of equipment, your EPR obligation do not get fully extinguished, but they get stretched. For example, if I had 100 tons of EPR obligation against which I am able to show 10 tons as refurbished, those 10 tons I have to comply with in maybe 4 years from now. They based on what the life of that particular equipment is. So that's the categories for e-waste. And finally, for batteries, we have four categories here: portable, electric vehicle, automotive, and industrial. The credits, like e-waste regulations, are based on recovery of various metals such as lead, lithium, nickel, cadmium, cobalt, manganese, iron, aluminum, copper, and zinc. If you think about it, all the batteries that we use, from alkaline batteries to lead acid batteries to lithium ion batteries, they all have one or the other combination of these various different elements or metals. So again, there is a prescription by the government that if you have a certain chemistry of battery, what should be the composition and what should be your recovery. And the recyclers are supposed to come out, should show the recovery of these metals and generate credits in tons or in kilos of these metals and then transfer them to the producers. Additional feature is just like plastics. It's not for e-waste, but like plastics, there is a mandate as the years go by for the recyclers, for the producers to use recycled content of these metals in their batteries. So also quite forward looking. Now, I said all the good things about EPR in India. Now, what the challenges really are, and there are many. First is that the audit of recycle, and it's in no particular order, okay? So the audit of recyclers and the recycling process sits with the government. The CPCB is the Central Pollution Control Board, which is the central government body, and State Pollution Control Board. So they have delegated the duty of auditing the recyclers to the state pollution control boards. Now, in a country like India, unfortunately, this is open to various malpractices and corruption, and hence a lot of non-deserving recyclers also enter the system in terms of being able to getting certified and offering credits. The exchange of credits is between the producers and the recyclers, thereby missing out on the remuneration to the informal sector. Now, this is a very important, maybe a little philosophical, but an important element here, that the informal sector make a very important, constitute an important portion of everything that has to do with every stream of waste management in India. Now, if EPR credits are generated by the recyclers and they are handed over to the producers, there is no guarantee that the guy who collects or the lady who collects the waste is also remunerated in a equitable, in a just, in a proper fashion, right? So it is very important that the last person is who is collecting the waste, who is segregating it, sorting it, and recycling it should also get compensated. One school of thought here is that because there is EPR, the recyclers are buying the scrap at a price which is higher than what it was earlier. But still, again, this leads to non-transparent practices. So it is important for the government to include the informal sector into the EPR system as well. CPCB unfortunately lacks the capacity to issue the address the issues and concerns of all registered producers and recyclers. Just imagine the numbers that I just threw out at you. This is the first time that the government of India is having to, besides of course the taxation and other departments which are quite well equipped in terms of systems, processes, and people. The environment department has probably had the first time to deal with so many stakeholders with an obligation which is brand new. So they are definitely, if you are a producer and you are confused about a certain rule, or if you're stuck and if you try to reach out to the CPCB, it could take hours, days, weeks, sometimes months to get a response. Also big challenge. There are regular glitches in the portal of credit transfer, including hacking into the portal. Now, it is unfortunately a shame for a country like India, which is supposed to be an IT powerhouse that develops IT systems for the world, to say that the EPR portal that is owned by the government is susceptible to hacking, right? So this has happened multiple times in the last couple of years, which is slowed down the entire compliance process. It has made the compliance process cumbersome and also unpredictable. There are standards lacking for use of recycled plastics in packaging, except for rPET. So RPET, there's one government body which is called the Food Safety Authority of India, which has come out with the regulations or the guidelines for rPET. But for all other types of plastics, there is a lacking of standards. Now, especially if that particular polymer is used for food applications, you can imagine that it is not that easy. So everyone's waiting for more such guidelines to come up. There's a huge gap in mandate versus implementation of recycled plastic for packaging. For example, if you read the regulation for recycled rigid packaging, come year 2026, at least 25% of all packaging that is introduced in the market must use recycled plastics. Currently, that number of percentage that is used for recycled plastic is at a very low number of less than 1%. So you can imagine the big gap that has to overcome. E-waste refurbishers are not yet registered under the e-waste EPR system, so that's a challenge in the EPR space for e-waste, and huge gaps in the capacities of battery waste recycling versus the targets that the producers have. Battery recycling in India is a new phenomenon. It's only a few years old. There are more and more recyclers that are coming up. But here, until recently, what was done is that the black mass that was produced by the recyclers was sent to countries like Belgium, Korea, Japan, etc., where the further treatment was done. But the government is insistent that if you want to generate EPR credits, you shall do the entire process within the country. So the recyclers are only just gearing themselves up for this entire end-to-end recycling process, which is taking time. But of course, the idea is to get there, but it's taking longer than we would like. The role of PRO in the EPR system, I already said that the PROs in the regulation do not exist. However, producers, large and small, across the country have seen the benefit of working with PROs, or what also the other term that is used for PROs is WMAs, or waste management agencies. So what are some of the advantages that PROs bring to the producers? The first one is timely updates of the ever-changing regulatory landscape and the impact of the changes on the producers. It is extremely important for the producers to stay abreast to the various amendments that the evolving regulations on all the material streams come up with. Also coordinating with multiple recyclers across multiple streams across the country. So recyclers are spread over across the country. They would like to do collections from various parts. Although the EPR regulation is not state is location agnostic, but still the larger producers would like collections to be done from various parts of the country. So it gives them working with PROs gives them an exposure to various recyclers across the country. While the government or the Central Pollution Control Board is responsible for the audits, we've seen various gaps in the audits that they have done, and various recyclers with dubious credits have been in the EPR system. So the brands or the producers want to be extra cautious and make sure that they do their own checks. So PROs give them that flexibility. The producers, especially the large ones, also, although it's not mandatory, would also like to run awareness programs, because if you think about it, as a country, that we have a long way to go, and awareness is a very important tool. So PROs also play that role of creating awareness programs for the producers. And finally, that there are producers who have regular requirements of liquidation of end of life material. So PROs also play an important role of helping them liquidate that material from various parts of the country. Finally, my last slide, and what are the lessons that are learned from the PRO system in India? There are positives and negatives here. I think EPR systems are only possible with political will and administrative capacity. I am happy to say that the government of India has shown a strong political will to introduce the EPR systems. The government realizes that India is one of the largest plastic polluters in the world, and some drastic measures need to be done. And hence, it has been used as a tool to really try and stem the plastic waste and the pollution from plastic waste. There are many complexities and many stakeholders in the value chain. It's not very easy. Now, from the time that the plastic resin is manufactured to the time that plastic waste is recycled, it changes about 9 to 10 different hands, because there are many distributors, suppliers, small retailers, large retailers, consumers, informal sectors involved. So it's very difficult for a legislation to encompass all these stakeholders and come out with a solid bulletproof regulation. EPR is a tool to mainstream the large number of informal sector players, as we've already seen the fact that so many stakeholders have already got themselves registered, which otherwise would never have. They work with cash, they work locally, they don't work across states. But now because of EPR, they are happy to bring themselves into the mainstream. It is very important for the regulator to build its own capacity while also looking at a very ambitious regulation. So as we have seen that there have been gaps in the Central Pollution Control Board's own capacity to deal with issues that the EPR systems have brought themselves with. Must include PROs in the system to manage the process for producers and the regulators. I think PROs, uh, that's one thing that I feel is lacking in the Indian EPR system, is that they should realize the importance that the PROs, important role that the PROs would play in terms of managing and streamlining the entire process, both from the regulatory side and from the producers and recyclers side. They definitely must consider a phase-wise approach of onboarding producers. Now, it is quite good to have more and more producers to be registered and have, instead of going in a piecemeal approach. But I think it is important uh, to bite as much as you can chew. So if you try to be too ambitious and try to onboard too many producers, quite possible that you will see failures than successes. And finally, I think that what the Indian EPR system has done quite well, it's regulatory wise, is that try and weave in recycling credits or evidence notes, as we call them, minimum level of recycling and mandate for recycled content in a single rule. It would bring about multiple changes, increase in capacities, and other subsidiary or ancillary rules and standards would also follow. So that I think is a big lesson from the Indian EPR system. In conclusion, I think these are very exciting times in India. Lots of issues, lots of challenges, but I think these are what I have also understood from my peers in Europe is that EPR was not successful in Europe overnight. It also took its own time. So hopefully in the next 5, 7 years, we will see a tremendous increase in recycling capacities in India. We're already seeing existing recyclers double their capacities, new recyclers coming up with setting up shops, and lots of investments also flowing in. So keeping our fingers crossed that things will go positively for the Indian EPR system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, and congrats. I think it's always so interesting to see or hear from the Indian case, along the figures, how many recyclers have registered and producers, etc. And also for you as PRO, not being mentioned in the legislation, I think it must have been a long and exciting journey to find its role in this complex landscape. So yeah, congrats to that, and thank you also for being so honest about the pitfalls and the challenges. I think that's always interesting to hear from other countries because, yeah, as you said, also in Europe, we're still facing challenges, although we've started setting up EPR schemes 30 years ago and still there. It's not perfect. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So we still have like 15 minutes for questions. We are a rather small group, so take your chance and ask all the questions you want to ask to Saurabh. And there's one question in the chat. You can either post them in the chat or raise your hand, whatever works better for you. From good experience, EPR can be applied in the Middle East or not, and which type of waste can be used to start? So yeah, maybe a hint if there is one specific type to start with, and if
Sure.
there's something particularly interesting, good experience that you would like to share.
Sure, absolutely. I think EPR is a strong tool, and it should be implemented in each and every country. It is the best way for making producers responsible or making them a participant in the entire waste management ecosystem, especially in countries. Now different countries have their different dynamics, but in countries where the it is more even though the governments have funds, but it is difficult for the funds to percolate from the government to the waste management systems, EPR plays a very important role. We've seen that time and again. If you were to ask me, and I'm sure that if you ask different people the opinion would differ, but if you were to ask me, my bet would be to begin with V or e-waste for EPR if a particular country is looking to set out, because these are end of life electronics are rather uh, easier to collect, and they're smaller in quantity as compared to the plastic packaging that is perhaps used. E-waste recycling or dismantling is relatively, I would say, it does not involve as many complexities in terms of contamination as a plastic or batteries would have. So again, to sum up, I would suggest that e-waste, EPR for e-waste is relatively, in my opinion, the first candidate to start if a country is looking to begin.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Then there's a lot of congratulations to your nice presentation. Thank you again from the audience. And another question, what about the increase in separate collection activities after the implementation of EPR? What is the increased amount percentage? Do you have some figures here?
I wish I had the number of what is have we as a country increased the percentage of segregated collection, because we still largely collect unsegregated waste. However, there are certain agencies, for example, India Plastic Pact, for example, is regularly tracks what is the percentage of recycled plastics which are used by producers, which if you then draw backwards, it also gives you an indication of what could be the percentage of uh, segregated waste streams or plastic streams that could be collected. So we are still at a low 1% of recycled plastics used by packaging by these producers. And that number, I believe, is going to be tracked regularly. And we hope to see that number increase, especially for the categories which are easier to collect, segregate, and recycle, like rigid plastics. We would definitely like to see that going to 2 digits, and also overall segregation increase. But yes, there are various different disparate efforts done by different agencies to track these numbers. It's very important. I completely agree with you.
Mm. Maybe just as a follow-up question, is it will like separation at source be introduced, or is that not a topic right now in India?
So you see, separation at source, the government always insists upon segregation, right? But there's only that much that the government can mandate. I think what is also interesting thing that we see happening on ground is that the recyclers are, there are more, like I said, there are recyclers are increasing capacities, there are more recyclers coming up. And recyclers are mandated to come up with good quality recyclates, right? Now, if they want to have good quality recyclates, they mandate they want good raw material into their factories, and now they mandate the informal sector aggregators to do better segregation of material, and they would pay them better if they supply better segregated lots to the recycler. So the entire downstream chain is getting better oiled, and everyone is getting better prepared, because everybody knows that yes, my recycler is looking for a better quality raw material, so I must segregate better. So then they are also asking the households to give them better segregated waste. It is, as a movement, of course, this requires multi-pronged approach from the government, from the social sector, from education, awareness, etc. But there are these, I would say, that grassroots movements which have begun to happen.
Great, yeah.
That's because of EPR.
It's good to have these different push and pull factors in place.
Exactly.
Definitely. Yeah. Great. There are more questions in the chat. Is it better to be PRO to be non-governmental entity or private entity? Yeah. The PRO, should it be government or
so there is,
private?
like I said, that the government does not recognize the PRO. So it can be a non-government entity like a not-profit organization or a for-profit organization who can offer these services of regulatory tracking of an EPR control tower for doing the various services that I told you, and it can absolutely be either of the two. And there is no mandate from the government side, or no specific preference from the producer side. I think agility is what the producers really look out for in the PROs that they engage with, and the broad network of recyclers that they work with.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree. Hebe, I also posted chat to our in the chat the link to our EPR toolbox. There we touch
yeah.
upon different models for PROs, the pros and cons for both for all models. So maybe that's interesting to have a look at.
Absolutely. I
Um,
think we've drawn a lot of references from the EPR toolbox, and I think it's beautifully made. In fact, there was a time about 2 years ago when we had to offer a training to the various stakeholders in India, and we took a lot of inspiration from the EPR toolbox.
that's great to hear. Thanks for the
Yeah.
feedback. Great. Another question on numbers. Do you know the percentage of free riders? And yeah, again, many thanks for the information you shared, Alfonso.
No, I don't think there is the number of free riders which is published by the government. I think uh, that probably eventually would come up, and right now it's not published by the government yet.
Mhm. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Another question. Sorry, two questions. What are the main tools, incentives to recruit the producers into EPR scheme? Is there an enforcement procedure by inspection or the ministry?
Yeah, so one of the policing tools that the government uses is that any producer that imports goods into the country, which has, and everything that you bring into the country would have some kind of plastic packaging to it. The customs would not allow the goods to enter into the country if you are not registered as a producer. If you're a large brand, if you're, let's say, a Unilever, Procter and Gamble, there is absolutely no way that you can go under the radar. But if you're a smaller producer that only imports, let's say, a few tons of materials, if you are importing, I think it's very difficult to not be recruited under the EPR scheme. And otherwise, I think it is that most of the large and medium producers are already registered. It is also interesting to note here that the government has given a waiver to the small and micro producers who have a turnover of a below certain amount, for them not to be registered, not to be encumbered by the entire EPR obligation. So that's one waiver that the government has given. Otherwise, I think the government has various checks at which, from the state level, from the customs, to make sure that more and more producers are onboarded.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. One more question in the chat. What do you know about the standardization process? Any joint work with international standardization organization happening?
I'm not sure if when you talk about standardization, are you talking about standardization of the rule itself or the standards for recyclates? I'm not
Uh,
too sure.
yeah, Lilu, maybe you
But
can
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
open the mic.
Hello to you.
hi.
Hey.
Hello. Yes, hello to you. Thank you very much for the perfect presentation. I'm very much interested to get a better picture. There's a minimum, yeah. Also in Germany, PBWR, for instance, there are also some requirements in the future for minimum recycling content, etc., etc. So I'm
Yeah,
just looking, is there any way? I think it's very important that countries work together, yeah, in harmonization. And India is such a big market. Yeah, so for a German, for instance, German
yeah,
producers want to sell to India,
yeah.
uh, and there's a different. There are so different requirements
Yeah.
depending from country to country. So therefore, the question.
Sure. Okay. So I understand that. Are you saying if there is any harmonization with any with regional or global rules, or harmonization with any other country in terms of EPR rules? Now, I have understood that while the building block of an EPR system anywhere else in the world is a PRO, whereas the government of India has gone away from the PRO system, right? So from that, whereas on the other hand, there are a lot of other commonalities that you will see between the EPR system in Germany and the EPR system in India. For example, if you see the categorization of different types of plastics, or if you see that the mandate for recycled content, they may or may not be under the same EPR rule. They could be a part of different rules, but the Indian system have taken this. My experience, my limited experience, suggests that each country would like to adapt what is already existing across different geographies to what suits really their need. And I think the governments also take a little bit of pride in saying that, we have not just copy pasted, we have understood the complexities of our country, of the systems in our country, and have modified or adapted that rule. Sometimes, unfortunately, what happens as a result is that you get rules which may not be able to talk to each other. So as much as I am in favor of harmonized rules across a region, across a continent, across the world, there are differences in how each country attacks or looks at its EPR system. And in that process, I think whether or not we like it, there are differences in the legislation, in the implementation, in the compliance.
Great. Lilo, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, your chance to ask the last question. Otherwise, I'm happy to ask the last question for today. You were also speaking about the credits, and I was wondering if there's like a distinction between downcycling credits and closed loop recycling credits, just to also have a pull factor here for upstream measures, or not upstream, but not downstream measures.
So there is a difference, as I said, between a recycling credit and an end of life treatment credit, right? So that those are clearly demarcated. Within recycling, I think closed loop credits and downcycling credits. So if you're making pots and furniture or you're making granules, they have the equal same standing, right? So there is definitely, now that you're saying it, that, and I'm sure somebody has already thought about it, that there is merit in considering different rating system for the ones that are more difficult. But right now it's the same.
It's the same. All right.
Yeah.
And there's also no push factor for reuse for packaging, for example, or is that something for the future maybe?
No, there definitely is. Maybe I missed out on that part. There is definitely an element of reuse which is also specified very clearly in the EPR system, especially for rigid plastics. So the rule clearly says that if you have a rigid container of 0.9 liters to 4.9 liters, you shall reuse a certain, I don't know the percentage offhand, you shall reuse a certain minimum percentage of that packaging in your own production. If you have a packaging size of more than 4.9 liters in rigid packaging, that percentage is close to 80 or 90%. So they are encouraging reuse of rigid packaging, right? And as against that, flexible and multi-layer packaging, they understand that it is not possible. They've also introduced certain minimum percentages of reuse for those packagings, but I'm quite sure that there will be a lot of pushback in terms of reusing flexible and multi-layer packaging because of mostly used for food applications or skin applications, and there will be all kinds of questions asked there.
Right. Yeah, good to see that also some upstream measures are included.
Right.
Right. Okay, I think our time is over, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Saurabh, for this interesting session and for sharing, your experiences from India. The recording and the presentation will be shared on our platform, so please feel free to check them out. Thanks you all for joining in. We hope to see you also next week, where we stay in Asia but travel to the Philippines. So also looking forward to that session. Thanks for Felicia, sorry for your technical support, and thanks all for joining in. Have a good afternoon or evening, and hope to see you soon.